I want to do a video that is kind of different than normal. If you've been here for a while, you might remember way back, like 5 years ago, I had this series on my channel called LBR, which stood for Lame Becca Rants. Yeah, I know, it was really creative. And I would just like stand in not my dorm room, but like it was basically a dorm room. It was a pretty cheap apartment, and just like rant about something unscripted. And that sort of evolved like my content in general. I started to not script content so much anymore, but it's been a while since I've done something negative, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's been a while since I've done something similar where I just like talk about something that I'm heated up about. And for some reason, lately, I have been heated up about the idea of lore. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're just going to talk about why I think lore is a little overrated, a scotch overhyped. What got me thinking about this topic was a video that Seamus Gorman made back in like December about soul. And he was essentially talking about how, you know, there are all these questions that you would think that soul would maybe try to answer, like, you know, what happens when you die, like, or maybe not necessarily that it would try to answer them, but that it would like address what happens when you die, like what's the meaning of life, like this kind of thing. And I'll just show what he said because he said it better than I could.
The film was centered around the existential dread of this great beyond. Like, the entire premise revolves around Joe's fear of death and inability to come to terms with how his life has gone, and from there the events of the film unravel. What happens after death? Is there a heaven? Do you just cease to exist? Had Joe failed in his life? Is that what not achieving his dreams meant? What is he going to do with it? What's 22 going to do with her life? And I think that's the beauty of Soul. They don't tell us. There's a lot more questions than definitive answers, mirroring life and death itself.
And like maybe that doesn't count as lore per se, but it got me thinking about just the general idea of how a lot of the best, most effective, most well-known movies don't have this like expanded lore. And I'm not here to like say lore is bad, right? But lately, I just feel like people are like, I want to get into a fandom that has like so much lore, and I want to just like envelop myself in the universe. And I don't just want to know about like the characters and their experiences. I want to know about like the whole world, the whole universe of this franchise, which is fine. But lately, I feel like there's been such an emphasis put on that it almost hinders works that might be stronger if we focused on other elements. So for example, I'll get on my Frozen 2 soapbox. I know most people like Frozen 2 more than Frozen. It's not a hot take. I think it's like generally the more popular opinion to like Frozen 2 more than Frozen. And I respect that opinion, but I disagree. First off, I think like if you watched Frozen 2 and you were like, wow, that was better than Frozen, but you haven't watched Frozen since 2013 when it came out, it might not be fair to compare to a movie that you haven't seen in like 10 years. So, you know, maybe rewatch both and then decide. But again, like, it's fine. I'm not offended. I'm just saying, like, for the sake of being objective, it can be useful to watch both films back to back and decide which one you like more. But anyway, everyone was raving about Frozen 2 because they were like, wow, we got all these questions answered that, like, we didn't even know we needed these questions answered, which to me screams cash grab. It's crazy because I really thought that all the Frozen haters, of which there are many, I thought all the Frozen haters would, you know, come out of the woodworks and be like, this is a cash grab, clearly, because it's, you know, answering questions that no one even wanted answered. Like, to me, coming up with extra stuff to talk about just to make a sequel, that's a cash grab, right? Again, loved Frozen 2, not complaining, but I just thought I would see more cynicism around it. Do you really need to chase your tail right now? But anyway, I guess I'm just trying to say, like, to me, this is an example of building up lore that doesn't really need to be built up. To me, personally, I enjoyed watching Frozen and seeing Elsa's powers just as a symbol of a secret. A lot of people can relate to having a secret and feeling like the world's going to crash and burn if you reveal it, so you just run away and bottle it up and it makes things worse. I feel like that metaphor was the important element of Frozen. I like that they're just there to help provide a vehicle to the moral that they're trying to teach. Frozen 2 takes that and turns it way more literal and, you know, gives a backstory to why she has the powers and, you know, what her parents had to do with them and where they were going on the boat, which really to me just felt like they saw that meme about the like Tarzan Rapunzel boat frozen thing and they were just like, let's comment on that. I wouldn't say it took away from Frozen. I wouldn't say that I have a problem, and I liked Frozen 2 again, but I don't feel like it was necessary to explain where Elsa got her powers. I think they're just there to be a metaphor for a secret, you know? So that's one that I'm really passionate about. I could rant about Frozen. I could make a whole video ranting about Frozen 2, honestly. But that was like one of the first moments where I sort of thought like, people really like lore. And they like lore for the sake of lore. And clearly this is something that like a lot of people disagree with me on, and it's fine. But to me, I think it's like really nice to occasionally just have a movie that's there to tell a story or teach a moral lesson, and we don't really need to know the backstory of every single element of that story. I'm gonna think of another one. Oh my gosh, another one that I put on my notes is Pottermore. Or just, okay, by the way, you know, content warning, gonna be talking about a turfy author. We all know, she who must not be named. We're gonna talk about her just real quick. We're just gonna touch on Pottermore and how J.K. Rowling cannot stop trying to add to the lore of Harry Potter. And it's like, I think the 7 books were like solid, and they gave quite a lot of lore. You know, we know the way spells work and the limitations of those, different types of potions and the 3 like unforgivable curses. There's so much lore, and yet this is definitely an example of a cash grab, honestly. In order to just like keep hype around her series. I mean, this is not entirely true. I think a lot of people really were excited when Pottermore first came out. But did anyone, if you went through everything there was to read on Pottermore and you like learned all that extra lore, comment below, because I don't believe that most of us did that. I think most of us went on there, got sorted into our Hogwarts house, maybe like played the potion making game a couple times, and then we left. I felt like I understood the universe well enough. I didn't need details upon details about, you know, every single professor at Hogwarts and all that stuff. And then now she's like going out and tweeting things constantly, just like kind of retconning things that were clearly written in the books. And again, it's like she's trying to like build up or correct this world that she created, and it's like, it's fine. You can just leave it alone. And then lastly, Legend of Korra. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, there's, again, quite a lot of lore. So, like, I really want to emphasize that I'm not saying lore is inherently bad, but there are times when a franchise crosses a line that really doesn't need to be crossed, and suddenly there's too much lore, and it's annoying or confusing, and people just don't like it so much anymore. And I feel like Avatar is one of the most noticeable examples of that. In Last Airbender, there's quite a lot of lore, and I think everything is, like, explained very well over the course of 3 books, if I recall correctly. So, like, quite frankly, not a lot of time, but we learn about, you know, the Avatar cycle. We learn a little bit about the origins of, like, bending. We, of course, know a lot about, like, the culture of each kind of bending community. So we get a lot of lore in that first series. And for some reason, I feel like Legend of Korra was like, you know what, we're gonna, again, just answer questions that maybe people didn't have. I mean, I didn't have these questions. But they start going into like all these details about like where bending came from and how there's like these 2 forces, like a good and evil, always dueling each other and blah, blah, blah. And there's something to be said about lore that is simple. You should be able to do an elevator pitch for the lore of your series. And if it gets more complex than that, if it gets so complex that you can't really explain the world that you've created within the span of like 3 minutes, it's maybe a little too complex. They really like didn't leave much to the imagination or much for viewers to speculate about. And I think that left a lot of people like feeling weirdly unsatisfied. By going into too much detail, you actually leave people feeling unsatisfied because they don't get to try to figure things out for themselves. So kind of on the flip side, some stuff that has little to no lore that I think does a really good job. The Good Place. This is kind of like Soul in that, you know, it's kind of like the afterlife stuff going on. I guess a lot of stuff that handles like topics of what happens after you die, it's understandable why you wouldn't want to go into too much detail about, lore of things that get so close to these existential religious ideas. But I do think, the Good Place does a really good job. Again, there's like very simple, straightforward lore. There's a good place, there's a bad place, there's, like demons and Janets, and we like maybe know a little bit about like how Janet works or the limitations of demons, for example. But really, in general, it's kind of like... Okay, spoiler alert for the end of The Good Place. Spoiler alert, I'll give you a timestamp. But like literally towards the end, they just change the way the good place and the bad place, like the sorting system works. Because they can. Because it's the afterlife. There's no rules. And that's hilarious and fun. Like, I don't know, I guess some people might be bothered by the fact that it's like kind of contradictory, I guess, but like I think that's kind of the point. And I think that also falls into, I'm going to skip around in my notes a little bit, but that also kind of falls into sitcoms in general. The Good Place, it has an overarching plot line, but it's like a comedy sitcom sort of thing going on. And yeah, clearly, like, most sitcoms don't have extensive lore, right? A lot of the time they're, contemporary. They take place in cities or situations that we're already familiar with, so we don't really need to explain the lore of those things. And they're also episodic, so they're inconsistent. We don't have a lot of stuff that's, like, overarching from episode to episode. And I just think that's fun. It's fun to have a show that you can watch that you just don't need to think so hard about. It's fun to have stuff that you think hard about, right? But not everything needs to be like that. And I feel like sitcoms are kind of dying. I don't know why either. Sorry, now I'm thinking about the sitcoms that I've watched that have come out in the past few years. Why are all the sitcoms these days so bad? Like, lately I've just been watching like these rebooted sitcoms, the iCarly, Fuller House, these things. And man, oh man, they drive me crazy. Because they'll just make a joke and then like explain the joke. And I'm like, I know. So I don't know, maybe sitcoms are dying because they're just not very good at being funny anymore. Hot take. With some exceptions, again, BoJack Horseman is great. Good Place is great. We got some good comedy things that might be viewed as sitcom. I don't know if you could consider BoJack a sitcom. But yeah, sitcoms are like a dying breed, and that's tragic because they're like the pinnacle of shows that don't have a lot of lore. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of like classic Disney Pixar movies. Luca's one that came out last year, and I feel like not enough people are appreciating Luca, by the way. I mentioned it in my 2021 favorites video. I love Luca so much. But like Luca's a story about like a boy who's a sea monster, and he discovers that when he comes up above the water, he just looks like a normal kid. And, he kind of plays around with that idea, tries to like live life as a normal kid. And that's it. He's a sea monster that turns into a kid. Why? I don't know. Where do sea monsters come from? I have no idea. The lore is there are sea monsters that look like humans when they're above water. And humans don't like them. That's all the lore. I don't even know what the politically correct term for sea monster is. When I was talking about it in my favorites video, I was like, is that what I should be calling them? That seems kind of like derogatory. But like, literally, there's so little lore in this series that like, I don't even know what they call themselves. They probably just view themselves as like people. There's not a lot of explanation about like where sea monsters come from or why there's this animosity between sea monsters and humans, right? It's not really explained. It's just there because, again, it's there to be a metaphor for, it's okay to be different. And, you can't always protect your kid from the evils of the world. He will find people who, accept him and love him. And to help tell the story and get those moral values across in an interesting way. And I love that. The Incredibles, again, like a lot of superhero stuff, we know kind of their origin story, where they got their powers. I literally looked up where Mr. Incredible got his powers, and it's just like he was just born like that. Like, why? How? Do we know about his parents? We don't know where any of this stuff came from. We don't know, like, why it's heritable. Like, why does a super strong dad and an elasticy mom make an invisible daughter and a fast son and whatever the heck Jack is? We don't know. It's just there. And it's like you just get thrown into the story and you're like, you're in this world and maybe I don't understand every part of the world, but you're just like absorbing the excitement of the story, you know? Sometimes you just like want to get into a crazy world and just like enjoy how weird the world is. Yeah, like I've been reading How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin, which is a short story collection of just like these sci-fi fantasy short stories. And man, I love it's just reminding me how much I love short stories because again, it just throws you into this world and you have 20 pages to like try your best to understand the logistics of this world and what's going on before it moves on to a completely different short story. I love that because again, like I don't know why stuff works the way that it works in this world. You just tell me like, yep, this kitchen can like transport you to a different time. And you're like, why? And it's like, I don't care, moving on, next plot point. I want to say maybe it's like, it feels more realistic because like that's the way the world really is, right? Like in real life, we have questions about the world that just aren't answered. So maybe it's that when a show or book or movie or whatever does that, it almost feels like the real world where you don't get your questions answered all the time. Okay, and the last thing I have on my list is just like benefits of having little to no lore. And the first thing that I wrote down, right, a lower barrier for entry. For me personally, I don't really watch Marvel movies because at this point the Marvel movies overlap so much in terms of like their lore and like, oh, that plot was like a reference to this plot from this movie and this, and if you watch the end credit scene, it's like a reference to this one and it's foreshadowing to this one. I don't know, I just can't get into it because like I feel like there's so much. It can be hard to get new people interested when they feel like I also have Star Wars and Star Trek. I love Star Trek. But I have Star Trek on this list too because I do feel like Marvel, Star Wars, Star Trek, these all have what feels like a high barrier to entry. You have these fan bases that are really, really hardcore and know every single detail about like every single person and what happened on this date and this episode of this season and blah, blah, blah. And it's fine. Like, it's so fine to be, like, that obsessed with the show. But if it gets to the point where people feel like they can't join the community, maybe that's when it gets to be, like, a little over the top. So having less lore makes it easier to enter a new fandom without feeling like you're gonna, like, say something wrong and embarrass yourself, and I don't know. Like I said earlier, sometimes I feel like too much lore can take away focus from other elements of the movie, book, etc. You know, stuff like character work and symbolism sometimes maybe gets overshadowed if we're spending too much time explaining and world building and doing all these things to like kind of explain the history of this world. And like, I guess this is personal preference, but I'm like a big character gal. If I am going to just like really get invested into a series or a movie or whatever, I need to really feel like I connect with the characters. And lastly, this is kind of a hot take, but I feel like a pro of having a little less lore is plot convenience. I know we don't like plot convenience. It's a problem. Like, plot convenience is not a good thing. But if a work is really restrained and confined to certain rules that it needs to follow for the lore, oh man, midichlorians. Anyway, moving on.
Midichlorians.
If a work gets to the point where it's like really restrained and confined to like certain rules of lore that it has to follow, it can kind of bite itself in the butt later in the story when maybe you need your character to do something really OP and it's like, but wait, they can't do that because earlier we said that their powers are limited in this way, so you kind of have to like work around it. Again, this is where I feel like it's good to have like a simple lore, right? Here's what my character can do, here's what they can't do, but don't go too detailed because if you say they can't do this because this and this and they can't do this because this, like you're probably like gonna contradict yourself later and fans are gonna call you out on it, or the characters are gonna be so limited they're not gonna be able to do something like really awesome at the end of the series. I'm on my Percy Jackson high, just finished freaking, what's this called? Heroes of Olympus. series. So, go check out my Percy Jackson video. But like, I'm just gonna ramble about Percy Jackson real quick, because I feel like this is a really good example. And listen, I know that this series is targeted at kids, and I think that part of the reason that the way this series works is because kids are just here to read some cool, fun action scenes. They're not here to like overanalyze what this character is allowed to do and what this character can't do. But like, I feel like the Percy Jackson series is a really good example of these, because the way people's powers work are wildly inconsistent from character to character. You can have two children of Hades who have very different powers. You got like Percy himself like constantly discovering that he can do new things, which like totally makes sense. Book one, it's like, okay, he can breathe underwater. He can like control water a little bit. He's still new. But we're like, okay, yeah, that's his like power, right? He can like fall into a river from like the top of the St. Louis Arch and like not die. I'm like, yeah, okay. That's what he can do. 4 books later, he's like making a hurricane. And I'm like, you know what? Sure. That's water. Why not? Like, you got characters like discovering new powers and new ways they can use their powers. And because it's not like ever explained explicitly, here's what they can do and here's what they can't do, you just kind of go, okay, you know what? Sure. And you just get to bask in how cool it is, instead of being like, well, I don't think she should be able to do that because technically, because according to the encyclopedia. But anyway, that's a really good example. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of the best examples of this are like kids media, I guess, because again, like kids are just there to like watch a show or read a book or whatever and see some cool action scenes and have a good time. And I'm like, why aren't adults here to watch a show and have a good time and just watch some fun action scenes? Like, am I wrong? Fellow adults, is this really what we want? We want to overthink every single thing we watch? I love thinking. I love overthinking. I mean, I've been known to do it. But like, TV is supposed to be like that escape from overthinking, right? Like, don't you ever want a break and just like want to watch something and just be like, wow, that's really cool. And I don't question why it happened. It's just cool. Am I crazy? Am I the only one? Am I the only one with this opinion? It's so weird. Yeah, sorry, that's my last point. So now I'm just going to start rambling. But I'm just like, I don't know. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of just stuff with not a lot of lore. I like to focus on the characters, focus on the morals, be surprised, and not know what could possibly be coming around the corner for my characters. Because again, like, I think that's what it is. I think it's like, that's how the world really is. Sometimes there's stuff that surprises you. You can't always know everything about the real world, and I think our fictional worlds could stand to be a bit more like that sometimes. So, like I said several times throughout this video, lore can be done well. There's lots of stuff that I like that has lots of lore. Specifically, earlier I mentioned Star Trek. I mean, I love Star Trek, and I love learning about, like, every single detail about like every alien race in Star Trek and all the languages, and like I spend so much time on the Memory Alpha Star Trek wiki pages. Like, I love that stuff. But at the same time, I also love to watch a show, read a book, watch a movie that does not have extensive lore, and just focus on those other elements of the work that I'm consuming. I can't tell if this is because like I'm getting older and it's like people think that like media is more mature if it has extensive lore, or if it's just like a general trend in media to like have a lot of lore in the stories that we're telling. And there's no love for these like nice one-off movies or things like short stories that just like quickly immerse you in a world and tell a story for the sake of telling a story. Coming back to like that cash grab thing, it's almost like it's some franchises do all this like extensive lore to like keep you coming back for more and like wanting to know more and more about the world and the details and stuff. And like, I really respect stories that can be short and say what they need to say and then say, thanks for coming, have a nice day, goodbye, So, I don't know. I just admire that. That's all. So anyway, I just wanted to rant about that. I don't know, it's been on my mind a lot lately, and I'm curious to know, what you guys think. Are you a person who prefers like super extensive lore, really fleshed out universes in the stuff that you consume? Or are you someone who likes, little one-off works that really focus on the characters and the morals? I think like all of these things are important to good storytelling, and there's not like one is better than the other, right? I'm just trying to say right now I feel like we're in a moment where lore has a lot of hype around it, and it's like don't forget that these other elements of telling a story exist. What are the things you look for when you're trying to get into a new series? For me, it is character work. I love a good fleshed out character. So yeah, let me know. Am I alone in this? Are you a big lore person? I would love to hear y'all's thoughts. But thank you for just like watching me ramble. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I put videos out every other Friday about music, media, linguistics, and whatever else is on my mind that week. Clearly I had something on my mind this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.